You may be thinking about buying a camera, you may have already purchased a camera. After spending all that money, are you wondering if the lens that came with the camera is good enough, or wondering what lens you should get? Unless you've done a lot of research on lenses, how would you know how well a particular lens performs? Well, I'm guessing that's why you clicked on this video. Let's dive into the world of camera lenses, where I'm going to show you how you can improve the overall quality of your images. Stick around to find out why choosing a lens may be more important than choosing a camera. Generally, lenses are categorized in terms of focal length. That's the measurement in millimeters of the distance between the center of the lens and the camera sensor. Now, the math can get rather intricate and hard to follow, but what's important is understanding how to associate certain focal lengths with certain types of photos. For instance, 85 millimeters is generally a great lens for shooting portraits, and 24 millimeters is a great lens for landscapes. But lenses can also be separated by other factors such as lens mount, sensor format, and whether it's a prime or a zoom. Now, we'll get into primes versus zooms in a second. When you're looking for a lens, you usually have the focal length in mind first and then decide whether it works as a prime or a zoom. So for example, if you're shooting portraits and you know you want to mainly shoot with an 85 millimeter because of the look, then buying an 85 millimeter prime makes total sense. However, if you want more flexibility with your shots, that is the ability to zoom in and out and to reframe, maybe you purchase a 50 to 150 millimeter zoom and not worry about changing lenses. The advantage to having the 85 millimeter prime lens is sharpness, faster aperture, and weight. A prime lens has only one focal length, usually a large aperture, and offers the best optical quality. A lens is either a prime or a zoom, but it's never both. So this 35mm f2.8 is a prime lens made for Sony. It's a great lens that produces very sharp images. It's small and extremely light. While walking around with this, you'll barely feel the weight. It may be very restricting for some and the perfect lens for someone else. But with primes, if you can't fit your subject in the frame, you have to move around to adjust. And if you don't like doing that, then you need to look into a zoom. Now, zoom lenses are made up of multiple elements that allow the focal length to be changed. There is a compromise with zooms. You trade the best quality for versatility. Now, because there's more glass that the light has to pass through, they generally are not as sharp, they have more distortion, and they're heavier. This is a 24 to 105 f4 zoom lens made for Canon. This lens is offered in a kit, but it's much more expensive than what you would normally see. Now, while I just gave you a handful of reasons to not want to zoom, don't cross zooms off your list. Many find that the ability to reframe your shot in camera is worth whatever downside zooms may have. And for lenses like this, the quality is quite good. But ultimately, deciding between primes and zooms depends on your shooting style. Primes are chosen for quality, while zooms are picked for their versatility. Now, some choose to have both in their kit. For me personally, I prefer the convenience of zooms, but I also like having a couple good primes for certain situations that demand better quality and faster apertures. If you're not sure what focal length you need, let's take a look at lenses starting at 14mm all the way up to 600. Ultra-wide lenses can start as wide as 8mm, which would be considered a fisheye, or curvilinear lens up to around 14mm, which most likely will be rectilinear, or lenses that make the lines appear straight. This lens choice would be for capturing images in either extremely tight spaces or because you're photographing really large objects. Now, sometimes they are used for creative effect, but lenses at this end and with the telephoto end are generally specialty lenses. They're great when you need them, but they're not walk-around or everyday lenses. Wide-angle lenses cover 16 to 35mm. These lenses have much less distortion than the ultra-wides, but you still will notice some distortion in the corners. Now, this is the typical range for a landscape or architectural photographer. Standard lenses would be 35mm to 70mm and are suitable for walking around, seeing the sights, and even some portraits. 50mm is what most consider standard or normal. They call it normal because it's said to be the closest to what your eyes see. Short telephotos cover 85 to 135 millimeters. This is the main range of most portrait lenses, but also can be used very effectively in landscape photography by highlighting or isolating a specific portion of a scene. Medium telephotos range from 135 to 300 millimeters. This would be a great choice for sports, concerts, or weddings. The main advantage being that the lens allows you to capture the action with more detail and to emphasize the subject, also separating it from the background. Super telephoto, which is the 300 to 600 millimeter range, are specialty lenses for wildlife and sports photographers. They're very hard to handhold, they usually require a tripod or monopod, and they take some getting used to as the field of view is extremely narrow. Now let's take a look at how your camera sensor size affects the lens choice. Digital cameras have multiple sensor sizes, but the two most popular are full frame and APS-C, also known as crop sensors. Full frame sensors are the same size as a 35mm negative. That's 24 millimeters by 36 millimeters. They are generally more expensive and provide better quality overall. Now, depending on which you have, you'll want to make sure that you buy lenses that are made for that particular sensor. Now, I'm not going into all the specifics of this, but crop sensors were first introduced when digital cameras became available to the consumer market because of technical limitations and lower cost. Because the sensors were smaller, they couldn't cover the same area of the sensor as full-frame lenses and thus have a more narrow field of view. This enhances the telephoto effect and reduces the wide-angle effect, which can produce vignetting around the edges, which is a black circular ring seen in the viewfinder. Manufacturers had to produce lenses with a smaller image circle that was proportionate to the smaller sensor. So while this is something that's not well known, it's very important to know what type of sensor you have so you can choose the appropriate lens. When buying a camera these days, it's hard not to see a ton of package deals. Generally speaking, the lens that is packaged as a kit is not expensive. It's a way to entice the buyer who might see it as less work than buying everything separately, kind of like those who choose component stereo systems over the all-in-one approach. These kit lenses almost always have slow apertures, so while it's pretty common to find the more expensive primes and zooms with faster apertures like 1.8 or 2.8 in the 3.5 to 5.6 range. Now this means you can't get the same amount of light, so while the kit lens is convenient and cheaper, with some exceptions, it's better to purchase your lens separately. Whether you own a kit lens or not, I have 3 lenses I would recommend owning with one caveat. Only one of these lenses could be ideal to own by itself. Now the 3 lenses are the 16 to 35, the 24 to 70, and the 70 to 200. The 16 to 35 is a great wide-angle lens. It's wide enough to capture most grand-scale images and zooms in enough to reframe your shot if need be. It's well sought after for landscape, real estate, and architectural photography. How much you'll use this lens totally depends on what you shoot. The 24 to 70 is another staple in the photographer's kit. It's probably one of the most commonly used lenses. It's wide enough to grab some sweeping landscapes, to a group photo, even some real estate interiors, and also at 70 millimeters, it's almost in the sweet spots for portraits, weddings, or even some sports photos. Now, if you can afford it, I would recommend buying one with a constant aperture of 2.8 over the one with f4. If you can only afford one lens of the 3, this is the one. The 70 to 200 is the workhorse of the telephoto end. It's tried and true with photographers. Its range of 200 millimeters is usually long enough for most situations, and the 70 millimeter end allows a decent amount of range to play with if you're too close. This is a lens you definitely want in your kit, but ideally as a companion to the other 2. There are a ton of lenses out there in the market, and it can be overwhelming trying to weed through all the promotional jargon as well as focusing on the specific things that are going to apply to you. But one option that is available is renting a lens that you think might be right for you over a weekend and really playing with it to kind of see if it fits. This way, you can also see the quality firsthand and get a real feel for what owning the lens would be like. The important point I'll reiterate now is that you know what stuff you shoot, and therefore only you can figure out what focal lengths you work with. And that narrows down what lens you should be looking for. But if you, like many, don't stick to one genre and you feel you need wide angles and telephotos and everything in between, then you really should concentrate on zooms and cover a broad range with one lens. It's not practical to carry around 5 to 6 prime lenses when you could carry 1 or 2 zooms. But if I had to recommend only one lens, what would it be? The 24-105. It's such a great do-it-all lens. I say do-it-all, but it can't do everything, but it can do a lot well. Or actually, I take that back. Probably go with my 24-240 because I'd really miss having the strong telephoto range. But everybody's different. The telephoto end allows you to get details in your shots that you miss with wides. So while the 24-240 I own doesn't have a fast aperture, the best clarity, or the least distortion, I know there would be a lot less photo opportunities that I would miss out on with that than if I only brought the 24-105. The quality of the 24-105 is probably a bit better, but not obviously noticeable. The 24-240 gives me almost the same flexibility of carrying the 16-35, 24-70, and 70-200. Now, if I look at each of the final shots and pick those apart, could they have been much better had I used primes? Perhaps on some, but that's only if you or someone is being super critical of each and every shot. And sometimes you have to just let some of that go and just take the picture. So when you choose the right lens, you want a fast aperture to be able to show depth. You want a good focal range to be able to fine-tune your composition. And you want a good quality lens so your shots remain sharp and clear. Remember, a good lens will hold its value for many years after your camera is old news. So those are my 2 cents. I hope that this has made the selection of a good lens easier and you found some value in this. Now I'm curious, what's your go-to lens? And what lens do you not own that you wish you had? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.